I think the Conductors are the true villains of Silksong. Sure, Grandmother Silk is the source of the haunting, but she has been sealed within this cocoon for what appears to have been a very, very long time. I don't think she can be held responsible for the current state of the kingdom, all of the misery and suffering we witness throughout the game. And sure, the Weavers share a lot of the blame here too. As we discussed in my last video, they're the ones who originally devised Farloom's false religion, which draws in all of these ordinary bugs and then traps them in this exploitative system. But it was the Conductors who, after the departure of most of the Weavers, named themselves the new Lords of the Citadel. They are the current kings of Farloom. These statues underneath the cradle describe the Conductors as living high in their gleaming towers, that they bear supposedly the heaviest mantle of all, to guide Farloom ever on to greatness. Or when you play the needle in beside one of these ministers in the high halls, they sing, quote, "Great Conductors, holy masters, your vision guides us, your devotion compels us, highest of the high." In that dialogue, the Conductors are treated not just as kings, but as something greater. You could compare them to the Pope or the Cardinals of the Catholic Church. Divinely inspired, God's authority on earth. Or as the last living Conductor, Ballador, says in his dialogue here, quote, "By the will of the Conductors we once boomed, in this citadel shook at our decree." But the words, how hollow they echoed. The mantle of rule claimed greedily from Farloom's fading first children, those bitter weavers. It was yoke, not crown. And we will discuss the regrets he expresses here in more detail, but for now we must answer the question of, what did the Conductors do with their newfound power? Well, they took the system of control devised by the Weavers and they transformed something that was already pretty bad into something much, much worse. As I discussed in my previous video, the Citadel itself is a huge spider's web, designed to keep Grandmother Silk sealed in slumber. There is strong evidence within the game that the Citadel was originally a much simpler place. The Weavers who built it had no need for gleaming towers or gilded halls or beautiful decorations or spas. They just needed these bugs to work, and in that labor all bugs were treated equally. It was the Conductors who later wove the rigid hierarchy of the Citadel we see in the present, the stark inequality of this society, where some bugs are allowed to live in golden splendor in the high halls, enjoying their spas and their gourmet cuisine, while others are condemned to toil in the dangerous smoke-filled caverns of the Underworks. I am basing this analysis primarily on the dialogue of a single character, or actually a single automated statue. This is Pious Isamor. He was hidden away in a secret chamber in the deepest, most difficult to access area of the Whispering Vaults. The purpose of these grand vaults is, to again quote these statues underneath the cradle, to guard the Citadel's history, its prayers and its secrets, across the ages. Well, this is perhaps the most closely guarded secret of all. This is knowledge that the ordinary bugs of Farloom were never meant to have access to. Even the higher-ranking Vault Keepers were probably not aware of the existence of Pious Isamor. His location can only be accessed from the chambers of the Pontiff, their leader, who jealously hoarded the most secret knowledge of the Citadel to himself. And not only that, but Pious Isamor is hidden behind a false ceiling that must be broken open. Evidence that the Pontiff went to extreme lengths to ensure that no one ever accidentally stumbled upon this relic. But why? What is so dangerous about Pious Isamor that he must be hidden behind this many levels of security? Well, let's take a look at his dialogue. At first, he appears to be entirely static, just another decorative statue in the Citadel. He only awakens after Hornet plays her needle in. Some of his dialogue is missing because after so many years in storage, his internal machinery is breaking down. This statue is very, very old, and the dialogue that remains reveals something very important about the Citadel's history. I have done my best to restore his missing dialogue. Obviously, it involved a lot of guesswork, but I feel fairly confident that I got pretty close to the original. Okay, here it is. "Hark, pilgrim, you climb into our eternal embrace. You who stand struggling at the threshold of our stark citadel of stone, know that your true service may now commence. forget the weight of your weary shell, forgo the urge to still your claws. Farloom commands you to give your greatest gift. Join our chorus, raise your shell, your voice, and sing. Pilgrim, cast aside those many sinful hopes for rest and reward. Remain pure, and within our midst ask for nothing. See our citadel's simple stone, bare and unadorned. See how plain our garb, how sparse our meal. Know that all excess is sin. Stay vigilant always for those wretched pilgrims who dare relent to their base desires. Left unpunished, they would thin our pure chorus, and their seductive sin would spread like flame. Dear pilgrim, dark it seems now, but let these words become your guide. Hear our voice, let it bolster your own. Give all of yourself for great Farloom, for the first children who bequeath it to us, for our salvation is sure to come. His dialogue appears to be a sort of automated induction ceremony, welcoming newly arrived bugs into the citadel. Isamor's statue was likely originally located at the entrance. Let's begin with the end, that final line. Give all of yourself for great Farloom, for the first children who bequeath it to us. This line is very important. The first children referred to here are the weavers, literally the first children of Grandmother Silk. Notice that Pious Isamor speaks about the transfer of power from the weavers to the ordinary bugs of the citadel in the present tense, meaning his construction dates all the way back to the very beginning of the rule of the Conductors, or possibly even earlier. This dialogue reveals what the citadel was like back then, and in his description, the society and culture of the citadel was very different at that time than what we see in the present. This place has been completely transformed. He describes it as, quote, our stark citadel of stone. Stark in this context would mean austere, without decoration or ostentation, maybe even sort of grim and bleak. Later he says, quote, see our citadel's simple stone, bare and unadorned. In the present, the citadel is the exact opposite of bare and unadorned. It is golden and glorious and beautiful, and every corner is filled with elaborate ornamentation and treasure and splendor. Next, Pious Isamor commands the pilgrim to, quote, cast aside those many sinful hopes for rest and reward. Remain pure, and within our midst ask for nothing. The weavers used a promise of paradise to lure bugs to the citadel, to take their place as its stewards. For example, up in the nameless village on the surface, if you play the needle in here, the Phantom says that all of his friends were lured down below by, quote, sweet promises whispered. However, way back then, as soon as those pilgrims arrived at the citadel, they were told the truth by Pious Isamor. There is no rest or reward here, only work and a vague mention of some sort of future salvation. The Conductors changed that. They rebuilt the citadel in grand style. There absolutely are rich rewards here now, but only for a select few. To get a better idea of what is going on here, let's take a look at another character, Loam. This is an old bug working down in the Underworks, and despite his advanced age and extreme exhaustion, he never stops running on this treadmill. And in his dialogue, he explains why. He says, quote, the harder me work, the sooner it come. Them's above, them watch us always. Work hard, and us will go up. And, quote, me cannot rest, us works, and the citadel breathes, and them's above do sing, and all is right. And when us works enough, them see it, and us gets us holy reward. And finally, quote, the citadel, most miracle of a place, bright and holy, fresh water for all, much as can drink, air so clean, can see the great roofs above. When me thinks of citadel above, me works hardest of all. The Conductors wield the promise of paradise not only to lure new bugs to the citadel, but to motivate the creatures toiling down in the Underworks to keep working and working and working in hopes of finally being allowed to ascend to the golden halls above. And let's talk more about the Underworks, because it is perhaps the most damning example of the misery that defined the rule of the Conductors. The entry chamber to the citadel is this grand hall filled with towering scales. I suspect that these scales were once used to symbolically weigh the sins or purity of newly arrived pilgrims, to decide whether they would be allowed to ascend, some sort of final judgment. However, at some point the entrance above was sealed, and all new pilgrims, regardless of how pure they were condemned to be dropped down into the bowels of the Underworks. These are claustrophobic and grim caverns with no possibility of escape, filled with dangerous machinery, the air choked with dust and smoke, where pilgrims are sentenced to work off their sins through intense, unrelenting, difficult labor. And they are not properly compensated for their work. If you run on this treadmill in Loam's chamber for long enough, eventually you will be rewarded with one measly, pitiful rosary. When you defeat the haunted Underworkers, they never drop more than 2 or 3. These bugs are very poor. And let's look at some of the journal entries here. The Underworker description reads, "Feeble servant of the Underworks. With all the refuse collapsing throughout their domain, the workers' stiff shell would be essential if they held any hope to survive. The underscrub, drained yet dedicated laborer, wielding a coarse steel brush. That they ever hope to keep their domain clean, what futility. The underpoke, drained worker on the verge of collapse. Consumed by the haunting, they continue to work far beyond their mortal limits. They toiled incessantly for the citadel, their shells bent and grayed, and now the kingdom's curse means not even death can relieve them. And finally, the underloft, exhausted bug grown sickly from the smog of the Underworks. The cost of so much grandeur, did I peer closely enough into the foundations of my own kingdom." In another video, we can examine the character growth Hornet undergoes over the course of this story, which we get a little hint of in that final entry. But for now, let's stay focused on the Conductors. These Underworkers are wretched, miserable bugs, exhausted, drained, sickly, and on the verge of collapse. Moreover, the economy of the Underworks is built on deliberate, systematic cruelty, low compensation for exhausting work combined with inflated costs for basic goods. As I'm sure every player noticed, in this section of the game you have to pay rosaries to rest on the benches, and as soon as you stand up, the bench is taken away again, meaning you have to fork out your hard-earned cash every single time you want to rest. From a player's perspective, it is really frustrating game design, but it is also a very effective way to tell the story through gameplay. The player will directly experience some of the exploitation these Underworkers experienced. And perhaps the most revolting example of all is the confessional. The bugs down here believed they would never be allowed to rise up into paradise as long as they remained stained by sin, and so they were probably encouraged to confess those supposed sins here, and of course to fork over a bunch of cash for the opportunity. However, the confessional is entirely automated, and no matter what sin you confess to it, or even if like Hornet you remain silent, its response is the same. Quote, "You have confessed a sin most grave, and must by works cleanse yourself. Return to your task and work off cycle, neither eating nor supping until new cycle begins." What really gets me is the religious profiteering, a ruling class so driven by greed that they would commodify even faith itself. You can see another example of this up above in the silk vending machine room. Silk is the most sacred material in this religion, a source of eternal life, and they were selling it like cans of Diet Coke in the office break room. You can see the results of all this profiteering in the treasure vault of the Conductors. Directly beside the forum, which is the central choral chamber in the high halls, where the bugs would raise their voices in supposedly sacred song, is this locked door, located far from the prying eyes of outsiders. Only those with the highest level of clearance, with access to the deepest layers of the citadel, would ever be allowed back here. Inside, you will discover what appears to be an accounting office, filled with abacuses, which the ministers use to count and measure their vast stores of riches and treasure. If you break into the wall here, you can find a secret rear path into the treasure vault. The player can collect over 500 rosaries in this room, which is enough to buy like 50 bullshit confessions down at the Underworks confessional. And of course, the worst part of it all is that the promise of paradise is a lie. These Underworkers were never going to be brought up above, no matter how hard they worked. Loam literally works until he dies. If you return to this room in the third act, you will discover that he died having never left his treadmill. If you play the needle in for him while he is still alive, afterwards he will say, quote, "Them sounds you make of holy sort. When me hear such sounds, me remember of home, me remember of be little. It make it painful hard to work, such remembers. Me must keep working. Please, friend, do not make them sounds no more." This is a character who has been completely broken by the Citadel's system of religious manipulation and exploitation. Back in Pious Isamor's time, there was still a lot of work, and it was definitely still exploitative, but there does not seem to have been any hierarchy or stratification of labor. If you play the needle in here, he sings, quote, "Pilgrims all, siblings serving, devout, unwavering, all are equal." It may not have been a paradise, but at least it wasn't outright slavery. And the only ones who could have transformed the Citadel in this way are the Conductors. They're the ones who would have been in charge for who knows how many centuries. They're the ones who have benefited the most from these changes. Moreover, Pious Isamor's dialogue explicitly condemns the current state of the Citadel. He says, quote, "See how plain our garb, how sparse our meal. Know that all excess is sin. Stay vigilant always for those wretched pilgrims who dare relent to their base desires. Left unpunished, they would thin our pure chorus, and their seductive sin would spread like flame." Well, that is exactly what happened when the Conductors got in charge, and also exactly why Pious Isamor has been hidden so deep in the vaults. The Conductors did relent to their base desires, for pleasure, for comfort, for money, and it did spread. It consumed the entire Citadel, and ultimately led to its destruction. Now we must discuss the obsession with silk, perhaps the greatest sin of the Conductors, which more than anything else precipitated their downfall. Silksong opens with a poem describing Grandmother Silk from a Conductor's perspective. The third line of that poem is, quote, "They forget your heart, bound in slumber and servitude." The final word there, servitude, is very interesting. It suggests that Grandmother Silk is not just sealed away, but has been enslaved by the bugs of the Citadel in some way, bound in service to them. The Conductors are using her, or more accurately, using her silk, extracting it from her cocoon, the very cage which is meant to keep her locked inside. I mean, can you imagine anything more reckless? It's like if you had a bear locked in a cage in your attic, and then you started scraping metal off the sides of the bars. And what were the Conductors doing with this silk? Well, that is revealed in this dialogue with the caretaker. He says, quote, "Have you done it yet, bell ringer? Wriggled deep, discovered the depths of obsession that brought this place so low." Hornet, quote, "If you speak of this Citadel and its silk caretaker, then yes, I know the start of it. In the ward down below, I saw it clear. The hollowed husks, and the many torturous implements, machines to instill a bug with thread that would see their life extended. Caretaker, quote, "Aye, that's it in part, but there's more scale to it than all that. Just think of 'em greedily shoving the silk into their shells, the madness that overcame them, eternal life for mortal bugs." This dialogue reveals that in a mad and misguided quest for eternal life, the Conductors injected themselves with silk, with the very essence of Grandmother Silk's soul, stuffing the substance of a god into their mortal bodies. The dialogue continues, quote, "Then think on how long it's all gone on, the children born of them and all the pilgrims after. The silk has seeded deep into this kingdom's shells, generations deep." Hornet, quote, "No wonder Farloom's bugs proved such easy prey for that haunted thread. It had only to seek for itself to reach them." Caretaker, quote, "Now you're seeing it, Bellringer. These poor pilgrims, all born bound to the cruel system of our world, now stricken in its new cursed web." In this way, just like so many other villains we have examined on this channel, in their greed, the Conductors were responsible for their own destruction. By injecting their shells with her soul, they allowed Grandmother Silk to easily seize control of every single bug in the Citadel when the haunting began, dooming all of Farloom. If they had not done so, they probably would have been able to resist the haunting for much longer, maybe even indefinitely. Hornet can find an audio recording of one of these silk injection surgeries down in the haunted ruins of the White Ward, and let's listen to a little bit of that recording together. Here it is. This audio is horrific. These operations were violent and painful. This is not surgery, it is butchery. And judging by the title of this cylinder, which is, quote, Last Surgery of Conductor Mazzello, performed in the White Ward's operating theater, I suspect that Mr. Mazzello did not survive. That's why it was his last. Notice that the primary opponent of the unraveled boss fight is the husk of a conductor, its corpse animated by silk. This is very possibly the body of Mazzello, and judging by the sheer number of corpses in the basement of the White Ward, many bugs died during these surgeries. There are at least hundreds of corpses here, and they were not given a choice. The sign up in the terminus reads, quote, Due to unacceptably high injury and unsanctioned deaths, ventrica travel shall henceforth be denied to all. For Farloom Eternal, a bug who serves must never die. And if you play the needle in around the surgeons, they will sing, O death, O sinful waste, we banish you. None may rest or idly die. None may die. None may die. And here is an extra piece of textual evidence I missed the first time I wrote and recorded this video, and so I am inserting it here. In this hidden chamber you can find the Oath of the White Ward, which reads, While song must be sung, none may falter. Infirmity, sickness, death, all are banished from our citadel. Anyway, back to the original script. This reveals that death itself was outlawed in the citadel. Bugs were required by law to undergo silk injection, to become immortal, to serve forever, which adds another cruel layer to the misery of all the bugs down in the Underworks. And what happened to those many bugs who did not survive the horrific surgeries? Well, that is revealed by this choral commandment, quote, Surgeon's orders. Devout has succumbed during silk suture, refuses to revive, sin committed, permit no rites, husk marked for cremation, retrieve dregs. First of all, the tone of this order is slightly hilarious. They are literally scolding this poor bug for dying. Like, we murdered this bug during surgery, and now he refuses to come back to life. Very naughty, very bad boy. The only way to retrieve the silk is to incinerate the corpse and pull what's left of the dregs out of the ash. The entire bottom layer of the White Ward is dominated by a line of massive furnaces for the purpose of burning bodies. It further reveals the absolute greed of the conductors, who are unwilling to allow even a single shred of silk to be lost. And now we must discuss the Grey more, but first a quick detour. Have you ever wondered what's up with these glowing silk moths or butterflies that can be found all over Farloom, the ones who broke Hornet out of her rune cage in the opening, or who guide her through the mist? Well, I think that is revealed by another choral commandment found down in the White Ward. This one reads, quote, Tattered decree of the citadel, bug of voice grown hoarse or shell fallen frail. You have been selected for duty most sacred. Become our light, our guide in darkness, that others worthy may climb to join the holy song. I know this may seem like a bit of a stretch, but it sounds to me like choir bugs who became too weak or too old to sing were ordered to undergo some kind of forced transformation into those butterflies. Notice how many of them roost atop this very frightening looking machine down in the White Ward. I think this might be the machine that performs the transformation. And if this is true, it means that the conductors did not even allow their servants to grow old in peace. Most of these silk butterflies end up just being used as lanterns or street lamps. Could you imagine after a lifetime of work being transformed into a street lamp? It's freaking humiliating. Anyway, let's move on to the Greymoor. If you look at the map, you will see that the furnaces of the White Ward are located directly above the Greymoor. Alright, I guess I was suffering from some form of temporary blindness when I first wrote and recorded this video, because looking at the map, the cauldron of the Underworks is pretty obviously located directly above the Greymoor. However, with that said, the furnaces of the White Ward are directly connected to the cauldron via this shaft here, so I think the following argument still stands. The Greymoor is being poisoned by the ashes of corpses being burned in these furnaces. Anyway, back to the original script. The air of this region is filled with dust and ash and silk dregs falling from the incinerators above. There is a strong undercurrent of ecological themes that runs throughout this game's story. Biowater was once a place of clear flowing waters, but has been poisoned by the pollution pouring out of the exhaust organ. Greymoor, Sinner's Road, Verdania, even the sands of Carrick were all once thriving and diverse ecosystems that have been destroyed by the operations of the Citadel. It is not just the bugs of Farloom who suffer, but the land itself. According to Kroll and Benjen, the moors used to be fertile farmland. They say, quote, "It's said that the moors used to grow a bounty of fresh food, way back before the Citadel set us about catching their fallen thread." Sounds right lovely, eh, missy? Always eating, never troubled by no grumbling belly. That's what all of the workers are tasked with doing here now, catching burnt silk dregs falling from the sky, spooling it together in these windmills, and sending it back up to the Citadel. The Conductors chose silk over food, and the land here has become so rotten, I doubt it could even produce any more anyway. The only food cultivated in this region now is the rotten meat of the muck roaches. Let's look at some of the journal entries for the enemies here. The dreg catcher description reads, quote, "Bug charged to catch dregs of silk that fall from the Citadel. These bugs look to have spent every waking moment at their work. Grim, endless labor in service of the unseen Citadel above. The silk snipper, scissor-wielding bug charged to cut and spool fallen dregs of silk for return to the Citadel above. Is it the haunting that drove them to cackling madness? Or was their unending toil the cause even before that?" And finally, the thread raker, tall bug charged to pile silk dregs in preparation for respooling. Theirs seems a sad, grueling task, serving their lifetime for a Citadel unseen. These journal entries are very similar in tone to those of the bugs in the Underworks. Endless toil and labor for no reward, no chance of ever reaching the golden paradise above. Alright, and here is yet another piece of textual evidence I missed the first time I recorded this video. The journal description of the Moorwing boss fight reads, quote, "Winged might beast bred large to catch workers who once tried to flee their tasks. This is confirmation that the workers are not here by choice. They are not allowed to leave and they are not allowed to stop working. Runaways are dragged back by force. This is slavery. I mean, these conductors are some bad bugs." Anyway, back to the original script. Society in Farloom is not just a hierarchy, but a rigid caste system, apparently based on your species. There is no upward mobility for those born in Farloom. Bugs are bred to perform specific tasks. For example, the squirms of the blasted steppes are raised to become judges, or the Vaultborn are raised to become scroll readers. Both of these species of grubs are bred in deep, dark chambers, their entire childhood spent in training to do only one thing, and once they grow up, their service will never end. Or another example would be the flies of the slab. The dialogue of this penitent reveals that they are not the jailers, but fellow prisoners. An entire race condemned to maintain this rotten prison complex for some forgotten sin committed in the distant past, never to be forgiven. They and their children and their children's children will live in filth and squalor here forever, with no hope of escape. In Farloom, your lot in life is determined at birth, and you will never be allowed to choose another path. Again, judging by the dialogue of Pious Isamor, where he declares that, in his time, all bugs were considered equal, this caste system must have been developed under the rule of the Conductors. But let's take a closer look at the final line of Pious Isamor's dialogue, where he says, quote, "Dear pilgrim, dark it seems now, but let these words become your guide. Hear our voice, let it bolster your own. Give all of yourself for great Farloom, for the first children who bequeath it to us, for our salvation is sure to come." From this dialogue, it is clear that life in the Citadel was always very dark and grim. Even back then, before the Conductors made it worse, bugs were already beginning to lose hope. The only thing that motivated them to keep working appears to have been that supposed salvation, which Isamor extols at the end of his speech. But this is just another lie. There was no salvation waiting for them. The Weavers were not going to come back or reward them for their service. These bugs had been tricked into a system of entrapment. In the end, the Conductors, for all their greed and despotism, are just as much bound by this system as everyone else. As Ballador said in that dialogue we examined earlier, quote, "By the will of the Conductors we once boomed, and this citadel shook at our decree. But the words, how hollow they echoed. The mantle of rule claimed greedily from Farloom's fading first children. Those bitter weavers, it was yoke, not crown. Now in our citadel's silence we share their truth. Only one monarch's claws ever clutched this kingdom, though we raised our voices to cry otherwise. Would you see her, pilgrim, up there at our citadel's crown? Reach those heights we'd hoped to hide and bow before this land's true ruler." The Conductors were false kings, ruling over a kingdom that never really belonged to them. The land's true monarch was always destined to awake eventually, and then it would become obvious to everyone just how weak they truly were. Ballador, as the last living member of his caste, complicates their portrayal even more. This feeble, sickly character, coughing and wasting away, unable to even rise from his bed, does not match the tyrannical and powerful image of the Conductors I have been painting for this entire video. Ballador is actually quite friendly. When Hornet first arrives in his chamber, he says, quote, "A visitor, now this is rare. I must apologize for not rising to greet you. After an age spent sickly, I find myself unable to lift from this bedchamber. I hope, good pilgrim, our citadel has shown you the courtesy deserved of a bug devout." Hornet, quote, "I've borne its hospitality well enough, aged one." Ballador, quote, "My sympathies, pilgrim, we have fallen so far, and now, sadly, if you've come seeking aid or understanding, I fear I too shall disappoint. Whatever you would ask, I have only my melody left to offer. It is a simple thing, the smallest of gifts, but perhaps more special now, for it has been rarely heard in these quieted times." And later, quote, "The mantle of Conductor weighs heavy. Had I known the cost before its bearing, would I have accepted the duty." And if you play the needle in for him, he sings, quote, "Dear devout, have we failed? Remember their voices. Now only silence, only our sickness, only our song." In this dialogue, the last living Conductor is revealed to be just as wretched and miserable as the most pitiful bug toiling down in the Underworks or the Greymoor. For all their power and their arrogance, in the end, they are left with nothing but the shame of having hastened their own inevitable destruction by surrendering themselves so utterly to greed and excess. They created a rigid caste society built on exploitation and manipulation and religious profiteering, and ultimately all of the suffering they inflicted on others was reflected back upon themselves. And that is the end of my analysis of the Conductors. Religion gets a pretty bad rap in the story of Silksong. The religion of the Citadel was a lie woven by the Weavers, which has resulted in untold suffering and misery over the course of the ages. However, that theme is complicated by the story of another character, Sherma, who in addition to probably being the cutest character ever in a video game, also undergoes a pretty fascinating character arc, where he starts out very childish and naive, but by the end is transformed. He ends up expressing a much deeper and more mature version of faith, and it is revealed that faith can actually be a very enriching and positive force under different circumstances. So next time, to get a better understanding of how that theme of faith is being portrayed in the story of Silksong, we are going to take a closer look at Sharma,